Do any of you remember the old TV shows from back in the day? Before the turn of the century, they were mostly sitcoms, short for situational comedy, and one of the primary features of those shows was equilibrium. In those shows, problems arose, characters made choices, the problems were solved, and then things went back to a normal equilibrium by the end of every episode. Characters rarely died, or divorced, or lost their jobs. It was pretty boring compared to the TV shows we get now, because there were no major consequences to character actions, unlike the burrito I just ate yesterday, which had major consequences. In this video, we're going to discuss the possible retcon of the Disney sequel trilogy, but before we do that, this is the obligatory spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the last few episodes of the Book of Boba Fett, then navigate away from here, go watch them, then come right back and finish this video, because there will be some pretty interesting takes on what might happen with the sequels as a result of the Book of Boba Fett and the rest of the Mandoverse moving forward.
And here we go.
Still here? Okay, well then I can tell you that today we're going to start off talking about the choice that Grogu made in the final episode of the Book of Boba. As we talked about the other day, Grogu had a significant decision, and by extension so did Disney. And many of us who hoped that Grogu would choose to be Luke's first Jedi student, thereby retconning the sequel trilogy, were disappointed. But there's a practical financial reason which explains Disney's decision, so step away from the ledge and listen to your hopeful captain of this here pirate ship. We're going to look at some evidence for why the sequel trilogy might still die. Then we're going to look at some evidence suggesting it will stick around for good.
Why won't you die?
We'll finish off the video by talking about my own personal take on the matter. And as always, I want to hear your thoughts as well in the comment section. Is the sequel trilogy retcon still likely or even possible? And if it isn't happening, will you still follow The Mandalorian? If all roads lead to the sequel trilogy, is it even worth giving a shit about The Mandalorian? Being powerless as you're forced to watch your own slow march toward doom isn't everybody's cup of tea after all. As I covered last week, there was plenty of excitement over the choice that Luke Skywalker presented Grogu in Episode 6 of the Book of Boba Fett. After the little guy seemed distracted during training, Luke told him to either take Yoda's old lightsaber and become a Jedi Padawan, or take the Beskar armor that Din Djarin had made for him and become a Mandalorian foundling. Since it was already established canon that Ben Solo, aka Darth Vader wannabe with resting bitch face, was Luke's first student at the Academy, this meant that if Grogu chose the saber, the sequel trilogy would be wiped from canon. Unfortunately, Grogu took the armor.
Why didn't I take the blue pill?
Let me put in my 2 cents on the Book of Boba Fett as a whole, and stay with me on this one, because this will end up being relevant, and you'll see why I started the video talking about sitcoms. You see, I've been thinking that the Book of Boba Fett ought to have been renamed. I've heard several funny proposals, the Dear Diary of Boba Fett because he's such a lame-ass bitch in this show, or the Book of Beta Fett. But lately, I've been thinking it should be called the Directory of Boba Fett, because it felt like the show was just listing characters from previous Star Wars material like it was a toy catalog. here's a character, and here's a character, oh, and here's a cool character, and of course, you remember this guy, and remember that thing that he fought in Return of the Jedi? Oh, and we don't want to forget this guy, sometimes he's in it too. And then there's these two. And this lady's back, and ooh, I'll bet you really like this one.
Are you just looking at things in the office and saying that you love them?
I love lamp.
In general, this show was about as exciting as reading out of a phone book. And I think there's a reason for this. Why didn't the show really feel like it was taking off until episode 5, when they stopped following Boba Fett and started following Din Djarin? Why did it feel like it became the de facto Mandalorian Season 3 for about 2 episodes? It felt to me that everything before then was just a clumsy jumble of garbage with a conflict that's pretty hard to get excited about between a ragtag group of uninspired space goons and the Pike Syndicate.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
I think that so many viewers were bored with the Boba Fett material in this show because the writers were bored with it. I don't think Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni had much love for this project, because I think someone higher up foisted this on them. Do you remember, after The Last Jedi came out and everyone was so pissed off at Lucasfilm that the fans boycotted Solo: A Star Wars Story? Well, that movie failed so spectacularly at the box office that a few months later, Kathleen Kennedy announced they had nixed the Boba Fett movie along with any other Star Wars movie projects they had planned besides Episode 9. I'll bet the studio, or someone higher up at corporate Disney, foisted this project on Jon Favreau. Someone at corporate probably did some market research and realized just how popular Boba Fett is, and they insisted he get put in his own show. Or maybe there were already Boba Fett story elements in place because a script had already been paid for from the now canceled movie project. That would explain the haphazard way that this story fits in with The Mandalorian, and it would also explain the glacially slow pace for all of the Boba Fett material. Because after all, a movie is only 2 hours, and we got several hours of material from the show. Seriously, I've passed kidney stones faster than the writers of this story got to the damn point. And speaking of getting to the point, I'll finally make mine. Disney didn't have Grogu remain a Jedi because there's simply too much money to be made from seeing him with Din Djarin in the future Mandalorian episodes. The Mandalorian is the one Star Wars project that made Disney money, and somehow they still haven't figured out why. Sure, Grogu is cute as hell and sells a ton of merch, but the biggest reason is because the show feels like Star Wars. You can feel George Lucas's presence and influence in the very bones of it. But Disney wanted to make a buck. I can't blame them, they're a for-profit company after all.
Hubba, 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 money, 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 who do you trust?
I still think it's very possible that Grogu becomes a Jedi, and possibly Luke's first student. After all, Lucasfilm already ditched a piece of canon just by making the lightsaber Luke Skywalker offered to Grogu be Yoda's. As we discussed the other day, that lightsaber was already canonically destroyed in a comic book a few years ago, so think about that. Really think about it. What reason did they have to choose that precise lightsaber other than it was a cool idea because the size of it would fit Grogu's stature? Luke could have made one size to fit the little guy, but it seems to me that the people at Lucasfilm are pulling out all the stops to make Grogu the center of the Star Wars universe moving forward. They've set a precedent now. Canon can be undone. And besides that, there's another reason to be optimistic. You see, writers are a tricky bunch of people. Many of them love to use foreshadowing in order to paint a picture of something that's eventually coming. And it's no mistake that in episode 5 of the Book of Boba Fett, the Armorer talks about Tar Vizsla, the first Mandalorian inducted into the Jedi Order. Grogu is clearly heading for a similar fate, and it's still possible that he'll join Luke's academy once they've milked as much as they possibly can from plastering the cute little bugger's face over every bit of merchandise imaginable.
Merchandising! Merchandising! Where the real money from the movie is made.
I'm afraid there are a couple of reasons to be pessimistic about the future of Star Wars. Let's take a look at this article from Bounding Into Comics. Lucasfilm again confirms The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett lead to the sequel trilogy. Lucasfilm confirmed once again that The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett lead to the sequel trilogy and the desecration of Luke Skywalker and Star Wars. In a blog post on the official Star Wars website, Lucasfilm confirmed the temple being built in Chapter 6 of the Book of Boba Fett is the temple destroyed by Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi. Kristen Baver confirms we've glimpsed Luke's storied temple in comic books and on film, although to be fair, it was mostly rubble and flame in Star Wars The Last Jedi. Now, we turn back the clock to see the new Jedi School at its inception, with androids working hard to place every stone on the first humble hut. Now, it is possible that this is the same hut destroyed by Kylo Ren, but then again, it's possible that old Kylo never exists in this version of Star Wars, and that he remains Ben Solo, and that a branching off point still takes place, retconning the sequels. However, this is a pretty big blow against that theory.
I have dreamed a dream. But now that dream is gone from me.
And of course, the most damaging evidence that the sequels are something we're stuck with, the fact that Grogu chose the armor over the lightsaber. Obviously, I can't answer this question for sure, but I certainly have thoughts. It seems to me that there's pressure on the writing squad of the Mandoverse to make everything connect. I also have the feeling that the company as a whole is trying to figure out what the hell to do. I think they're flying by the seat of their pants. A corporation as large as Disney is obviously doing a lot of market research, and they clearly understand that the fan base is divided. The bulk of their decisions will be made using hard numbers. So let's take a look at this Google Trends chart. The blue line there represents how much the Book of Boba Fett was searched up on Google recently. This first mountain here represents the show's first episode, and it's perfectly normal for the start of a show to bring in a lot more fan interest. Each of these little hills in the middle represents episodes 2 through 5. In the 5th episode, The Return of the Mandalorian, we see interest go up a little, but then interest really takes off here on this mountain, which is when episode 6 came out. I wonder what could have gotten the fans so excited about the show. Unfortunately, as of the recording of this video, the information for the Google Trend final episode isn't available, but we can see on IMDb that the fan rating for this episode is down quite a bit. Chapters 5 and 6, featuring Din Djarin, The Mandalorian, and Luke Skywalker, were rated a 9.4 and 9.5 respectively, but Chapter 7 plummeted down to 7.8, which is right in line with where the rest of the show was rated. And as you can see here, on Rotten Tomatoes, we're back down to a 60% rating. For the first 4 episodes, the show managed to slide down to 60%. And then, over the past few weeks, with the reveal of The Mandalorian and Luke Skywalker, the show went up a few percentage points to 62. But now it lost that support, and I'd be surprised if it didn't slide down into the 50s, which is adjacent to The Last Jedi territory. What I'm trying to say is that if this lowly space pirate can find this information, then so can Disney. They can see what is popular and what is not. And in order to predict the move a corporation like Disney will make, you should first follow the money. This is why they had to return Grogu to Din Djarin, because without him, the show's ratings would suffer, and their merchandise wouldn't sell as quickly. Unfortunately, this means returning the show to a state of equilibrium like one of the old sitcoms, and it means we're going to become desensitized to danger because there seem to be no consequences to decisions if you try to maintain the status quo in a show for too long.
Boring!
I think ratings will go down, and this may necessitate Disney playing ball with disgruntled fans.
Listen to me now. Listen to me now.
I still think that a retcon is possible, and depending on how loud the voices of the sequel trilogy haters make their voices, it might even be likely. But what that will look like is hard to say. It might be a hard retcon and not a passive one like we predicted with Grogu becoming the first student of Luke's. At this point, I'd put my money on Ahsoka as the best bet for the retcon project. The veil of the Force being used to ensure that the Emperor never comes back is a way that may please both camps of fans, the ones who like the sequels and the ones who hate it. After all, if Ahsoka prevents them from happening Back to the Future style, then the sequels would still have some narrative weight behind them as an alternative future. However, it's also possible that the writers are using our desire to nix the sequels as a way to lure us in. What do you think? Is the retcon still on, or are we being duped? Thanks for watching, me hearties. If you haven't already, your captain is inviting you to subscribe to the channel and become a part of the crew. Life as a space pirate may not be glamorous, but there's always plenty